Hello everyone, this is episode 8 of Audiobookish and I'm here with Poppy Knight.
Hello.
And this episode is going to be a review of Slaine, the Horned God from Penguin Random House Audio. Would you like to read out the blurb for Slaine, Poppy?
Yeah, of course. So, for too long the people of Tir-Nan-Og have suffered under the dominion of the drunes, strange druids who have poisoned the land with their magic. Slaine has had enough of their tyranny, and through the Earth Goddess, he learns some shocking truths about the priesthood and his own future. Now Slaine must unite the 4 kings of Tir-Nan-Og and use their mystical weapons as he and the Sessair tribe prepare for all-out war.
And this is a graphic novel adaptation, well, an audiobook adaptation of the iconic graphic novel created by Pat Mills and Simon Bisley. Pat Mills is an iconic British comic writer and editor who helped revitalise the British boys comics scene in the 1970s and has remained a leading light in the British comic scenes ever since. He's been referred to as the godfather of British comics. His comics are notable for their violence and I can't say that word. Okay, you know what I mean. He's best known for helping to create 2000 AD and has played a major part in the development of Judge Dredd. Simon Bisley is an award-winning British comic book artist, best known for his work on ABC Warriors, Lobo and Slaine. His style is reliant on paints as well as inks, and his influences are Frank Frazetta and Bill Zielskiewicz. And yeah, so they're the creators of the graphic novel that this audiobook is based on. Penguin Random House Audio have done a series of these 2000 AD adaptations. They've done this, Judge Dredd, and there was another one whose name I can't remember. So I think there's about 3 of them that they've done, and I think they're doing an entire series. So I think this was your choice, Poppy. How did you first hear about it?
Well, it sort of was. It was kind of a collaboration one, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Because you pitched that we do one of these 2000 AD ones, and this one definitely stood out to me as being more my sort of thing. I mean, we've got the kind of fantasy angle, the mythology stuff that, just made this one seem really exciting for me. So yeah, it was definitely my top choice of the 3. And of course, Rebecca briefly mentioned it in our interview with her as well, that she thought it would be awesome. So took that on board.
It's kind of a full production audiobook. So we've got multiple vocal performances. So I think kind of the main narrator is Uko, who's a dwarf companion of Slaine. So I was just wondering, kind of when you first started listening to it, what were your kind of initial impressions of it?
Yeah, definitely. So I hadn't read the graphic novel before. I went in straight for the this audio, but then after I listened to it, I got the graphic novel and I read volume 1, and then I read with volume 2 from the audio playing in my ears. Yeah. And then I went back to just reading volume 3. So we'll definitely get into some of how that went for me. But yeah, back to when I was first listening to the audio, I've kind of got my notes here. It feels so radio play. It's how I kind of, because it definitely did. And I thought that was really good. I mean, I've spoken before that I love things like that, and full cast stuff is awesome. And especially when they don't abridge, just fabulous. I added here that it made me feel like it was a bit of a parody. But I think that's because, so one of my favourite radio series is called Elven Quest. And it is a brilliant fantasy parody series. And so obviously, the nature of parody is it takes tropes that actually exist in a genre and, uses them but makes fun of them a bit. So that obviously then colours you a little bit when you go back to something that is more actually a member of that genre, I guess is a way you can talk about it. And it made me sort of feel like it was, just because it felt so similar to Elven Quest. But then there were other times where it did feel like, kind of as I got more into it, it felt kind of more, okay, yeah, I'm straight in with this. And then another comparison, I listened to an audio version of The Hobbit about a year or something ago, and it started feeling a bit more like that as well, especially with, like you say, Uko the narrator was kind of like that style. So yeah, it was nice because I could relate it to these 2 different experiences that I've had. But yeah, both good ones. And yeah, it does actually have some comic elements in it that kind of hark a little bit to Elven Quest as well.
Yeah, I think for me, the sound design on this is absolutely superb. Yeah. Sometimes with radio plays, I struggle a little bit to kind of like get into the world, but the sound design on this immediately grabs you and you're kind of like immediately with it and you go with it. I would say I do have a slight criticism of like, I think maybe the opening 10, 15 minutes, it was a little bit like quite exposition heavy and there was kind of a lot of names being thrown out there. And I read a lot of like fantasy and stuff like that. So I think maybe when I see a name spelt down on the page, it's easier for me to keep track of who that is in relation to other people. But especially some of the Celtic names, they sound quite similar to each other. And so I was finding it, I know you've just said that name, but who's that in relation to that person? So yes, it was a little bit exposition heavy. Yeah.
Yeah, my main one with that was the actual place names. So, because there's Phineas and Phalius, I think, are two of the kingdoms that, it says about in that blurb. And yeah, there was a bit, both when I was listening to it and reading it, where I was like, wait a minute, I thought they just went there. And I was like, oh, there's two different places that sound very similar. But yeah, I get you.
Yeah. So it's kind of really nicely paced and kind of, I think Uko is the standout star performance of the series. I think his performance is full of humor and he's kind of a nasty piece of work that's also kind of trod on a lot as well. So I really enjoyed his part in the story and his performance especially.
Yeah, definitely. And to go to Elven Quest again, so there's a character called Creech in there, and there's definitely some parallels between Uko and Creech. The sort of hanging on the tails of the I almost said main hero, but that isn't the case for Creech because he's on the bad side. But yeah, hanging on the tails of a kind of master figure and the regular beatings that are sort of made fun of and stuff like that. And they play dumb, or they are kind of seen as the more dumb character for a lot of it. But then at other points, they show some real cleverness and things like that. So yeah, there's a good parallel there.
Yeah, and just going back to the graphic novel, I think for me, that a big draw of the graphic novel was Simon Bisley's art. I think is so striking. So there is something lost in the adaptation, but I think there's also something quite a lot gained. So I remember reading these back when I don't remember reading The Horned God specifically, but I do remember there were Slaine graphic novels in my school library. And this is an image that struck of me all this time, kind of 20 years on, is Neve giving birth alone, cold and kind of, half naked, giving birth to Slaine's son. That's an image that's kind of stuck with me all that time. And you can't really capture that with an audiobook, but you do get other things from it. So I was just wondering, maybe it's a wider question to approach towards the end of the review, but I just, as you read the graphic novel and listened to the audiobook, what do you think was gained and lost? No.
Definitely. And like you say, we probably will touch on it more as we go. But I completely agree with you that the images are stunning. They really are. Yeah, I'm kind of glad I didn't just do the audio because, like you say, you do miss out on that. As a kind of, I guess, a lighter one to start off with, there's a lot of kind of fantasy creatures that you don't get the visuals of, obviously, in the audio. Yeah. That's fantastic in the actual graphic novel. But then also kind of plot-wise, there was a lot that I had missed. And in some cases, realised I missed, and in other cases didn't realise I'd missed, as for like what actually happens. So a lot of the time in kind of fights and stuff, in the audio, I didn't quite realise who was winning or what was happening because that is told through the images in the graphic novel.
Yeah.
One in particular, the evil being that Maeve brings up to attack Neve, to kill Neve, ends up eating himself, right? And, I didn't quite understand how that happened when I was listening to it. They kind of say, oh, he's so stupid, he ends up eating himself, which is fair enough. And that is kind of the overall reason why it happens. But then when you look at the graphic novel, Slaine actually puts his fist into his mouth while he's fighting, which is why he then ends up keep chomping away and then eating the whole of himself. But I had completely missed that in the audio. I remember sitting there being like, okay, but why did that just spontaneously happen? Because you didn't get the fact that Slaine had done that to kind of start it off.
Yeah, I think that is, if you're adapting the book the way that they've done it, I think that's an inherent limitation because action scenes they're more difficult to translate audio-wise unless you're giving like a full description of what's happening. So yeah, I mean, you can kind of translate it with, sound design, so sound effects and all that sort of thing. But to actually get the kind of like the ebb and flow of like an action scene just that way, I think it's quite difficult. Most of the time, I think it worked well. So, there was that one. And I think the final conflict as well, I kind of lost track a little bit of what was happening there.
Yeah, and I do totally get you. And I think with a lot, that would definitely be the case. However, I think the fact that this graphic novel is the way that it is gives you a bit of leeway on that.
Yeah.
So it is a very narrator-heavy graphic novel anyway. It's a very meta text because it's the idea that Uko is the scribe. He is writing down all of these adventures and we are reading his things. We often zoom out into his writing process and what's going on and things like that. And there are a lot of places in the graphic novel where it does explain stuff in a very narratorial kind of way that could have just been left to the pictures and weren't. And I feel like it wouldn't have been a ridiculous thing for instances like that to have added a little bit of that kind of box narration part into there, especially when I was in volume 2, I was actually listening to it while I was reading it. There were some changes that were made to the text. There were some sentences that got added, and definitely some words that got added in other places. And yeah, I feel like where in other graphic novels, if it doesn't have that kind of narrative style, it would be very imposing to then have a description explanation part in for sure. But I feel like this one, you could have compensated a little bit for some of those moments where there is a change in the battle or something like that is just shown in the images. That maybe they could have snuck just a short line in there that would still fit the style, that would still be respectful to the original, but would maybe help you along a bit in the audio so you didn't feel too lost.
Yeah, I think that's kind of a fair point. I think the other thing that we probably need to know is that this is kind of like brand new frontier in terms of audiobook adaptations. So I'm sure, lessons going to be learned along the way. So, it's kind of when you're adapting a book to a film, you have to make an adaptation to make sure that story works in the format that you're choosing to tell it. All the vocal performances were absolutely superb. Uko was excellent. I really enjoyed Neve's performance.
Yeah.
Mabe was delightful, and Slaine was everything you kind of would want from that performance, kind of like charismatic, cunning, kind of the performance you'd want to hear.
Yeah, totally. I was quite pleasantly surprised by how faithful it was because sort of, like I say, fresh ears, just listening straight into the audio, I wasn't expecting it to be so narrative. A lot of the graphic novels that I've read do rely on the pictures a lot more heavily than this one does. And I genuinely didn't know how much they changed it. So it was kind of nice when I then opened it and went, oh no, this is how it was then. It was like this. So that was kind of cool. And yeah, like you say, all of the performances were incredible. They're not necessarily the voices I would have had. There was a few times when I was reading it where I'm not sure that I felt they matched up. So like with Neve, like you, I loved it in the audio. It's not necessarily the voice or the style I would have picked. If I were choosing who would match up with those images, like I said, it's not a bad decision, just not how it matched with me.
So like Neve, for me, her relationship with Slaine is a really complicated and tortuous one. They don't really get into it too much in the audiobook, but like Neve was really badly let down by Slaine earlier on in life, and like the actress was good, but I would have maybe chosen someone who sounded like she'd been through a lot more like terrible stuff, if that makes sense.
She sounded very young, didn't she? Like quite child, and not in a childish way, but as in youthful. Which obviously she is, but yeah, I get what you mean. A sort of naivety as opposed to a experienced, maybe, is the distinction.
Yeah, as opposed to kind of like Mabe, who carried that kind of all, the stains of everything that she'd done in a kind of vocal performance. I think a little bit more. Yeah, maybe Neve was a little bit too full of life. Maybe I think it was. I don't know.
I get you. Yeah, and then also because kind of going with that, she's drawn in a graphic novel at certain points, especially it was very muscular. I loved it. I thought it was awesome. But yeah, it isn't necessarily the impression you get from the audio. Not that people who sound like that can't look like that, definitely can. But yeah, it's like you say, it's that sort of, I mean, like every form of art and storytelling, you're always asking your audience to pull on their own cultural associations and stereotypes. It's just how it works. And yeah, for a number of reasons, it wasn't necessarily like an exact match, but it didn't necessarily need to be. And kind of similarly, there was some moments, like I say, you can only tell if you're literally listening and reading at the same time, where maybe like the facial expressions didn't quite match the tone that the narration was using. That seems like a directorial decision for, okay, we're going to take this in a slightly different way to maybe how they intended it in the original one. Pacing was definitely one that I thought was really interesting when I was going through it like that. There were times where maybe the sound effects for what was going on in one panel didn't involve the dialogue that was going on in that
Oh,
panel. Maybe
okay.
that was a bit sooner or a bit later or stuff like that. Really interesting, like intricate things of just how they decided they wanted to build the picture in the audio version that was just slightly different to the graphic novel, which I was just fascinated by. I was thinking, oh, why was I doing my dissertation last year? This would have been an awesome thing to dig into with proper detail. That kind of adaptation is just, really interesting.
So one of the things I really enjoyed about this was their use of Celtic myths as kind of a basis for a lot of all of the story, really. So I was just wondering, basically this and kind of Song of the Sea are kind of the only two like recent examples I can think of where Celtic myths are used as the base of a story. And I think that's such a shame because there's such a rich seam of characters and incidents that you can kind of mine to tell stories from there.
Definitely, and it kind of gets overshadowed by, Norse myths, Greek myths, stuff like that. They end up kind of as the big hitters, don't they? But yeah, there's so much that you can mine out of that. It's unfortunately not something that I am massively knowledgeable on yet, but definitely would like to learn more on it.
Yeah.
And I think as well, I was kind of picking up on something from earlier, your knowledge of like the other Slaine novels will have helped you there as well. So like you were saying with Neve's relationship to Slaine and things like that. So as well as the mythological world that they pull on from actual Celtic myths, kind of the fact that they can also pull on the world that's already been created for Slaine is quite interesting. But yes, if you only come at it from this audio adaptation of this one story, you won't necessarily have that.
Yeah, I think at a certain point you've got to take a story on its own merits and kind of maybe, I don't want to say put the blinkers up, but just take it as it is.
And you definitely can have this one on its own.
Yeah. And I think a lot of the people that will be listening to this book will be fans of the graphic novel, so they will come with all that knowledge and background into the kind of the characters and stuff like that. But even if you didn't, I think it's so beautifully like put together and engaging that you will get a lot out of it. That's from the vocal performance, the sound design, the story.
Yeah, a zillion %. And, I can definitely say, given that was my experience, that's totally the case. And, again, going with, I didn't realize how much they changed it or hadn't changed it. So at the beginning, it does a kind of echo saying, if you're going to enjoy this, you're going to want to know some of the backstory, and goes through the backstory.
Yep.
And I wasn't sure if that was something that, because this was a new venture, if we're going to adapt these kind of ones on their own, we're going to need to do this for our listeners. But it isn't. It's actually something that is in the graphic novel, kind of just as a maybe people are reading it and they haven't read the other Slaines and stuff like that. So that was something that was already there. But yeah, clearly the same thought processes of, if somebody new is coming to this, what do they need to know, which is really cool. And then you were saying there about that you get some advantages in the audio. We've touched on it a few times, but some more things to say on that, because even though, like we say, plot wise, there's maybe some things that you don't get because the pictures are missing, and some things like the animals and things like that. But there are some things that are either done as well or maybe even better. So echoiness is one of them. Really quite early on, you get a zoom out of Echo writing in a massive stone hall kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I could, like I say, I had already heard it when I saw this picture, but I could hear it in the image. The image is so good at telling you that echoiness. But then equally, when I was listening to it, I could see it. That echoes were superb. You could tell how big the room is. You felt the walls were cold. Stunning, really stunning, the echoes. And the echoes underwater as well.
Oh yeah,
that
that's
underwater
such a good
sound was incredible.
Yeah, yeah, it's like the sound design on this is superb. I've not listened to The Sandman, but that's kind of another. I've heard a lot of things about the sound design, and that I would be hard pressed to see it beating the sound design in this one.
There,
it does give you kind of a really environmental feeling. Kind of even the battle scenes, you can feel like the smokiness just through the sound design and the effects that they choose.
Totally, it is phenomenal, and like the 3D element with it as well. Going from ear to ear, which side it's playing in was so good.
I missed that. So I was listening to it on my iPad. So I might need to listen to it again with my headphones on then.
Yeah, there is some, and it's nicely done. There was one place where I didn't love it as much. So there was a part where someone was like panting really heavily. I think it was Maeve, that was just a bit weird because it was kind of like there was panting coming from one ear and then the other ear, and it kept switching. And that that was a bit.
Okay.
I was like, where am I at this point? Why is she panting in different ears? But apart from that, it was fabulous. Yeah, you felt like you were kind of in between. When like Slaine was arguing with Cathbad, you were in between the two of them, if I remember rightly, and stuff. So that kind of stuff was, that was really cool. So yes, I do recommend you listen again with some headphones.
Okay.
But I'm sure it was also great without.
Cool. So, I mean, just going to like the meat of the book itself, that I've got like themes written down in my notes, and I've got feminism, environmentalism, men taking credit for women's work, anti-religion ? Bad traditions versus building a new world. So I think maybe talk about feminism ? As one of the themes of the novel.
Yeah, I mean, we've discussed gender things in a lot of these episodes, and I don't want to be that guy, but we've got to talk about it in this one, haven't we? You couldn't talk about this book and not talk about the gender stuff in there. Obviously, as I've said before, I have a bit of an issue with things that are so binary. They're so men are this, women are this, which it certainly was. Apart from, I loved one bit that was quite early on, I think, when he's in the cauldron talking to Danu, the earth goddess.
Yeah.
And they were kind of talking about back in a time when women were ruling the world and stuff like that. And it was kind of, there was an idea that they were treating men like objects, like men in that present. And certainly we can relate to some parallels in our world. And it was nice because it was kind of the idea that it isn't about gender, it's about who has the power.
Yes.
That was quite interesting. It's like, we're all the same. It just depends who's managed to end up in charge, kind of thing. So I liked that. But then everywhere else in there, it was very, these are this and these are this. Apart from, like I say, Muscular Neve did a good job of pulling some of that back, and she was, smithing a metal hand, and she was kind of taking on some traditionally more masculine roles and stuff. But overtly, it did a lot of men are this, women are this.
Yeah, and I think I don't. So I've got feminism ? Down on my notes, because I think there is a lot of criticism within the book about how men, and especially the priesthood, treat women and handle power. But Neve has obviously got a key role to play within the story, and Neve is one of the main avatars of evil as well. But it did, I don't know, I'm struggling to kind of like verbalize what I'm thinking about its approach to that dynamic, because I don't know how you felt, but I did feel maybe it was trying to get across the point that things would be so much better if women were in charge. But then, like, Danu, not to give spoilers, but it doesn't necessarily work out that way for Slaine when he does try and sort of give women more power.
Yeah.
It's a little bit all over the place for me.
Yeah, and I think, like you say, that's one of the reasons why it is difficult to pin down. I don't think anyone can say that it has one message. And part of that is because, so we've talked about how Ukko is writing down this saga.
Yeah.
He's telling you the story, but Nest actually changes some of what he writes. And there's kind of a commentary
some of my favourite bits.
Yeah.
Some of my favourite bits were just kind of like, well, we'll just cross that out. And that whole idea of Ukko and Nest being like equally unreliable narrators.
Exactly. That's the thing. The whole book is really unreliable. There are some parts where you get told by a kind of unnamed being, a translator, I guess, from the writing that Ukko did to our English that we're reading or listening to it with, that tells you, okay, this part we reckon was written by Nest. This part we reckon was written by Ukko. There's some parts that are definite, but most of it you don't actually know. And there's no way to tell whose perspective it comes from. And you have them set up as complete opposites. So you have a lot of Ukko is set up in quite kind of misogynistic terms, in viewing women very much as just sexual objects. In a lot of ways, he does do that. He is certainly not in any way a feminist icon of the book.
No.
And then you have Nest, who's very much on the other end of the spectrum, who pushes so hard for her version of this is a feminist way, and equally in the things I don't like of being women are like this, that's why they're different from men kind of stuff. And as a slight tangent, I love meta stuff.
Yeah.
I think it's fabulous. But I think it went a bit hard going on the message sort of thing. I feel like she just laid it on really thick when she was kind of going, no, Slaine did that because he was following the way of the Horn God, because he was acting more like a woman, and just like telling you what the message was meant to be, which I felt like you could have done it in a slightly more subtle way. But even that, you can't say that is the overall message, because it isn't necessarily, because of these, two different, both unreliable narrators. You don't know what's really the truth. And then at the very end, you have the like eternal living ones tell Nest to stop interfering as much with the story.
Because like people reading it want more of like the violence and stuff like that. So
which, like I say, is the polar opposites and not necessarily good. She's trying to get rid of the violence. It's like, nah, I love the violence. Let's keep, you've got to have a nice balance between the two. But that was a kind of an interesting thing of, okay, so where does the book stand overall if the ending is telling the woman to butt out with her feminist sort of angles on it? So kind of summing all that up is that I completely agree with you. It's very difficult to describe what its stance is and what its message is, because it really doesn't let you answer that question.
I think kind of its environmentalism stance, I think, is a little clearer in terms of Danu being Mother Earth and being sick and tired of being used and abused by men above, and civilization spreading incessantly across her land and building cities and things of that nature, and making the argument that there needs to be maybe more of a balance, because otherwise bad things will happen to the tribes of men.
Yeah, definitely. And as a way to connect those two themes, there's kind of like a mixed, but as in like really nicely entwined metaphor about covering her up. About men being obsessed with covering her up. And I liked that you can read that both and simultaneously in covering up women, covering up their bodies, not letting them have autonomy over their bodies and how they want to express them, how they want to show them, and things like that is definitely a part in there. You shouldn't be controlling my body. But also then, as you say, it's also a brilliant metaphor for the environmentalism stuff, the idea that they're putting cities all over the earth, just forgetting about nature. And that tension between those two things.
Yeah, I think that's something that you can kind of go back and listen to it again and try and figure out what Mills and Bisley trying to kind of get at there. I think the other thing for me, like the other two major important themes were, I say like anti-religion, like question mark. I think it's more about questioning traditions, bad traditions.
Yes.
Versus trying to build a new world that's fairer and better for everyone. Yeah,
it was definitely, a case like there is with a lot of things. It's normally more against organised religion than it is against religion itself. It's got God in the title of it. The Horned God, it is about gods and things like that. And they are respected and important characters. And the idea was, the problem was that these drunes and druids were twisting that religion. They were making the gods into something that they weren't, to suit their own purposes. So definitely against organised religion, but not clear about its stance on religion as a kind of, I guess, a more pure faith thing.
Yeah, I think it's kind of like that. I don't know if you've read like a lot of Terry Pratchett, but in kind of like Discworld, like gods do exist, but it's just because they exist and they've played a role, as should you actually pay them any heed or respect or worship?
Definitely. In Pyramids, you've got an amazing comparison here. I can't remember the names. It was a while ago since I read it, but you have the same thing, a new king takes over, but it's actually his advisor that's really running the show and claiming that the gods are saying this, the gods are saying that, and then the gods come back. It's like, actually, that's not what they were wanting, and you're in deep trouble.
Yeah.
Sneaking it in there, in case we don't come back to it, some other great Pratchett things of just this kind of, relating stuff to our world into this fantasy setting, which is something that he is fantastic at and has done really well in this book. And then dragons. And there's a dragon farm briefly mentioned that, reminded me of Pratchett. And then also Maeve wanting to be sacrificed is a very Colour of Magic, like fantastic thing of princess wanting to be sacrificed to the gods. I wouldn't say that they are similar, as in if you like one you'll definitely like the other, or that they've got the same overall tone, because they definitely don't, but there are some nice connections, I guess.
I think Slaine as a comic book does kind of where it's influence. So I'm not saying that Slaine was influenced by Discworld, or maybe vice versa more so, but Slaine is very much in the sword and sandals, kind of like Conan the Barbarian hero. He's very rarely seen without his shirt off, kind of, I know it's like Tir-Nan-Og, but, in my head it's quite similar to Ireland, which I don't think is, dependent on your tolerance for temperature, always like shirt off weather. I don't think.
I get what you mean.
Yeah. And that, obviously that doesn't come across the audiobook too much, but yeah, it's kind of just one of those things there as well.
And also you say that, but it's going back to what you're saying about how amazing the performances were. You can really hear Slaine's confidence in his voice. And I guess that's normally what the kind of men's shirt off thing represents.
Yeah, I suppose so, yeah.
Bravado and confidence. And you definitely do get that in his voice. Yeah, even when you can't see it, you sometimes get the same atmosphere from the sounds as you could get from the visuals. And yeah, I think that definitely does show.
Just going back to the performances, one of the things I really did appreciate was the fact that it's basically an all-Irish voice cast, from what I can tell. And I really appreciated the use of accents to actually lend a sense of place.
Yes.
Because it would have been really easy for them to go with the decision to kind of like just everyone speaking in Shakespearean style, voices, if you know what I mean. But they chose to go with a variety of Irish performers, with a variety of regional Irish accents as well.
I was just about to say that as well. Yeah, the fact that it's not one Irish accent, it's multiple different kinds of Irish accents was really cool. I mean, it's certainly more subtle in Echo for the main narration. Is there?
Yeah, so for me, for me with Echo, I originally thought that he was English, but then there are certain points where his Irish accent does come across, but it's a lot more subtle than many of the other performers in the production.
Yeah, but yeah, like you say, definitely fabulous that they have kept that. I think it would have been wrong for them not to. Like you say, there was definitely a choice that they could have not done. And, if this was done a number of years ago, possibly would have been the case. But yeah, it was certainly right that they did have a lot of Irish accents in there, a lot of different ones, like you say. It was really cool, gives a sense of place. Even though technically Tir-Nan-Og isn't Ireland yet, they moved to Ireland at the end. It's still fabulous the way that works and does sound, incredible.
Yeah, I really enjoyed this. I'm kind of, out of us two, I'm the one who's a little bit more reluctant to go into the kind of full audio play kind of this style of adaptation, but I think this worked kind of exceptionally well. The other Penguin Random House audio adaptation that I listened to was The Ballad of Halo Jones, which it was fine, but I just think it's a far weaker story than this. So when you've got a kind of a story and a rich cast of characters, a rich plot like this, and I think it just lends itself to this sort of adaptation far better. So I think I really enjoyed it quite a lot, and I think they've done quite a superb job with it, and I'd recommend it for fans of the graphic novel, fans of fantasy in general, just fans of like audiobooks as well.
Definitely, I completely agree. And I was thinking of you when the sound effects were coming in and stuff like that. I was like, I wonder what he thinks.
Yeah.
And so quite early on, when it's doing this sort of catching you up part, Uko is narrating past adventures that they've had, and you get the sound effects of these past adventures happening. You get swords clashing, you get dragons screeching and stuff like that. And even before I even had the graphic novel, hadn't even bought it yet, I could picture that. I could see it, but I could see it, sort of in a film where like they overlay the transparent film
I know what you mean.
of the scene. They just overlay it so you get both the narrator and you can see what's happening. That was the impression I got in those moments, and it does happen a few times later on. But yeah, doing a flashback in that way was just superb. But yes, I didn't know how you'd think about that. So good to know that you liked it.
Yeah, I mean, it's not that I'm completely kind of against it. I will listen and enjoy audio. The next one that we're going to be doing is a BBC radio play, which is got kind of like sound effects and multiple performers in it as well. It's just, I think you need to think really carefully about when you do it. And I think they have here. And I think they've treated the material with respect that it deserves.
For sure. And, like you were saying before, it is certainly something that lends itself very well to the adaptation. It was a good pick to go for. Clearly, they weren't writing it with that, in the future, someone will make an audio version of this. They clearly weren't, but it does lend itself very well to it. But like you say, could have easily been ruined. It could have been done badly, but it wasn't. It was superb. Yeah, really, really good.
So I'm a bit keen now to check out the other Penguin Random House audio adaptations. One thing I do want to say, so how long is this audio adaptation? Let me just have a look. I think it's about 2.5, maybe 3 hours long.
Yeah, because it's kind of an hour, then 45 minutes, then 50 minutes, I think, something like that for the 3 different volumes, split up into those tracks, which is quite nice because you do get a kind of, you can take a break if you want, just the way that it, came out and the way that it's structured, you can listen to it in those parts, which is quite nice, or you can just binge it all in one.
Yeah, so I think I purchased this for around £10, something like that, off of the Apple iTunes store. So I think that's a perfectly fair price for this audiobook. I think on the Audible website, if you've got an Audible membership, obviously you can use your credit, but they've got listed for £25, which I think's a bit expensive for 3 hours. But if you're going to get it from, if you've got an iTunes account, get it from the iTunes. I think £10 for this is well worth it. I think you kind of mentioned previously when we was talking about this, that's kind of the price you'd pay for like a cinema ticket.
Exactly, yeah, that was what I was thinking, because I also, saw the Audible price and was like, for 3 hours. And then, yeah, like you say, the Apple price is a lot lower. And then also, I listened to it all the way through and then also listened to the second one, and then we'll listen to it with other people because it was really good. You do have that replayability that you don't get with a cinema trip. And yeah, that was what made me go, no, you know what, because I would spend this much for, going and having that. I'm very glad that I did it. And I then paid an extra amount of money to get the physical graphic novel as well. So that clearly shows that I thought it was worth putting that investment into it. Because, it was really good. And it does have that replayability. I guess it's kind of a bit of a weird one, isn't it? Because you sometimes think with a longer audio thing, okay, you get more of that experience, therefore you'll maybe pay a bit more. But actually, how many times will you listen to a 11-hour audiobook? Whereas how many times will you listen to a 3-hour audiobook?
Yes, I think that's quite interesting, actually.
Yeah,
there's not many audiobooks I probably would go back and listen to again, actually. I think that's an interesting point.
Yeah, it's very off topic, but it's an interesting thing about the model that Audible's got. It's not kind of a library loan system. It's not a Netflix streaming system. It's you purchase one a month and you have it forever, but really how many times are you going to listen? It's an interesting thing that this audio market that is more like a book market that has used the library system for ages, that they have that kind of, it's based more on actually owning something. And you can't loan things to other people like when they were predominantly on CDs. And stuff like that. It's just, I don't have any answers to it. It's just an interesting thing I've been thinking about. Yeah, but in this case, owning it is good because you will want to listen to it over and over, I think.
Yeah, so I would highly recommend getting it. Is that a recommendation from you as well?
Oh, for sure, yeah. And so part of the reason that I wanted to do the listening and reading at the same time bit was partly for, looking at those adaptation things, but also to see whether I would recommend the sort of multi-sensory experience of all the things at once. And I kind of do. It was quite good, but I think however you get to it, if you do the graphic novel or you do the audio or you do them together or you do them both but at separate times or whatever, I think they're all phenomenal. So definitely a huge recommendation from me.
I think that's 2 thumbs up from both of us. I think the next book that we're going to be, the next story that we're going to be doing is BBC Drama's Gundren. This is kind of like one of the first radio stories that I think I listened to, so I'll be quite interested to see what you think about that. So stay tuned. I think we're going to be doing Carpet People after that, and then we might have a few exciting special guests appearing as well. Okay, guys, thank you so much for taking the time to listen to us. I hope you stay safe. Things are opening back up in the UK, but don't mess it up, guys.
Second that.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Bye.